14 consecutive years of professional success. Every year, several of his works were accepted in the May Show, and between 1921 and 1937, he won 6 May Show prizes. In addition, every year, several of his works were exhibited in the museum's special exhibition of contemporary painting and in their traveling oil and watercolor shows.
Watercolor painting had been thought of as a minor media, something that artists might use for drawing. Millikan thought of it as its own distinctive media, and he wanted to encourage it. So he created a separate category for watercolor painting in the May Show. He also found 3 patrons who established 3 separate prizes for watercolor painting. This encouraged local artists. In 1924, Millikan went even further by establishing an annual watercolor show, and he was also instrumental in encouraging the foundation of the Cleveland Watercolor Society. And through his efforts, Cleveland developed a distinctive watercolor painting school that set a national model.
The museum's special exhibition of contemporary painting continued as long as Millikan remained director. In 1937, Biehle's work was sent to the Whitney Museum in New York in a show of Cleveland work. Important to his ability to continue painting was his wife, May. She managed all household chores, both indoor and outdoors, and took charge of the family's finances so that Biehle was free to paint. She planted fruit trees and raised vegetables and grew the flowers which he used in his still lifes. From 1920 to 1950, Biehle painted a number of floral still lifes. At least one was done in celebration of the birth of a daughter. He used others as gifts or as payments for his family's music lessons. He enlivened his paintings in this quietly traditional genre with spontaneous fluid brushwork and lush color. In the summer of 1922, Biehle and his wife vacationed at Zoar, Ohio, a quaint early 19th century community built by German religious separatists who had once grown or made everything they needed, and who, until 1895, had held everything in common. Biehle may have learned of this village of log cabins with red tile roofs from F.C. Gottwald, who had run a summer school for artists there at the turn of the century. During the 1920s, Biehle turned out a prodigious number of gouaches there and a few oils. Some of the gouaches show the influence of Impressionism and of the summer school at Berlin Heights. At least one of the oils is reminiscent of either Van Gogh or the Italian modernist Segantini. But many are mixed media works in a linear style in which both forms and shadows drawn with black crayon or pencil are combined with colored areas painted in gouache. Now, this may have been a return to the linear studies he had made in Germany, but it was more likely a carryover from his work at the lithography shop, doing line drawings. Today, these paintings are treasured in Zoar for historic reasons, since some of them, such as the mill and the lime kiln, remain the only record of buildings that were destroyed without ever being photographed. Then came the stock market crash in late 1929, and by 1931, artists were among the millions out of work. For the first time, Biehle found himself struggling to support a growing family. About 1933, the federal government's Work Progress Administration, the WPA, came to a partial rescue of artists by commissioning works of art to be placed in public buildings. William Millikan, director of the Cleveland Museum of Art, was put in charge of the Cleveland region. This is Biehle's copy of a piece he did for a school in Lakewood. Unfortunately, the whereabouts of the original, like that of so much WPA art, is unknown. This lunette's flat, decorative patterns, based on closely observed floral and bird forms, go back to Biehle's Kunstgewerbeschule training. However, these forms are heavily outlined and are influenced by the more up-to-date Art Deco style. The brilliant, pure hues may have been his attempt to enliven the bland school setting. Biehle painted imaginative, decorative sea creature murals for Hermann Pichne's restaurant pavilion at the Great Lakes Exposition of 1936. Mural commissions, sporadic work in out-of-town lithographic studios, and the gradual lifting of the Depression gave Biehle the freedom to be more experimental in his painting. A fascinating example is this farm scene near the canal. He superimposed a linear arabesque over a drawing of a landscape with a farmhouse. He has left the traditional perspective intact, but whenever the lines of the design intersect with the lines defining trees, house, or fields, they create shapes which look like facets when painted in three-color values. This painting appeared in a 1930s May show and was chosen again by the Cleveland Museum of Art for a 1990 exhibition on the history of the May show. A second Cubist oil, a vertical landscape developed from a detail of the trees in the first painting, was apparently considered by the artist to be a failure.
The Changing Seasons painted a year, in 1936, a year after the original farm scene near the canal, is more abstract than the original. Out of context, this big shape, which was the tree before, now is a non-objective decorative design. These tree branches, they still stand as the sole realistic component in this painting, which is otherwise abstract. The detail of the painting was transferred onto this piece of masonite. Biehle also transferred most of the grid lines. The lines, the real curvilinear lines here, they move from inside into all different kinds of directions. Some of them rejoin themselves, and then they define boundaries which form new shapes. You have this large X shape here, which encloses this form, is really a spiral or a fern-like shape. Before, this was the orange tree. Now he uses what was background before to complete the shape of the spiral. These are these typical Jugendstil elements. The spiral, the fern-like shape, and the egg, they were both used in Jugendstil before. And it shows that Biehle, who maybe wanted to do a pure Cubist painting, still is influenced by Jugendstil here.
What gave Biehle, who still had a young family to support, the courage to spend time experimenting with a style that was not liked by Cleveland's public can only be conjectured, for it had been 23 years since the European Cubist show in Cleveland.
The essence of Cubism is to compress space, to show overlapping planes, to show foreground and background simultaneously. And August Biehle was very skillful in the way in which he used this technique to create Cubist compositions, and particularly watercolor. It seemed to be the perfect media because it's so transparent and because you can create this sensation of overlapping planes and this sense of spatial compression. You can see in this watercolor how Biehle has exploited the transparency of watercolor and in various places allowed the whiteness of the ground to show through, so that you see the paper, you even sense the paper underneath the color, which are brilliantly luminous because of the transparency of the pigment. And he unites these planes of color with the background, with the paper behind it, in order to create this sense of continuous space, which is the essence of Cubism.
Biehle did own the important 1914 book, Cubists and Post-Impressionism, by Chicago enthusiast A.J. Eddy. But the impetus may have come from Biehle's old friend and mentor, William Sommer, who persisted in his own brand of Cubism through the 30s and 40s, as did Clara Dyke, a painter whom Biehle had known since the Berlin Heights days. During World War II, Biehle's time was fully occupied drawing maps for the U.S. government. Thus, the war marked the first time that Biehle did not enter the May Show. But to celebrate the Allied victory at the end of the war, he did this painting of Cleveland, which is full of stylized symbols. After the war, Biehle's life took up its normal rhythm. He worked at the lithography shop for 7 more years, and he retired at age 67. In 1955, he joined George Adamite and Cleveland School of Art teachers Paul Travis and Frank Wilcox in an exhibition at the Cleveland Artists and Craftsmen Society. He continued to experiment, to study, and to learn. His son, who had become an artist after surviving the war in the Pacific, invited him to attend a workshop given by the New York artist Max Weber at Bowling Green University in the summer of 1955. While there, Weber assigned still lifes, stressing utter simplicity. Many months after the event, Biehle did this faintly cubist colored pencil still life of fruit on a white cloth. But although the composition is strongly ordered, it is quite complex, and the style, with its planar handling of the forms, is more reminiscent of Cézanne than of Weber. One by one, Biehle's old friends and painting colleagues died. During his last 5 years, he painted very little. In February 1979, at the age of 94, August F. Biehle Jr. died, leaving behind his wife, 3 children, 10 grandchildren, and his life's work, a legacy which continues to bring visual delight to his descendants and to gallery-goers alike. As an American painter, Biehle was sometimes criticized for the variety of his stylistic experimentation, but his work remained rooted in the secure base of his apprenticeship with his father and his years of European study. Whatever the style of the moment, he tried always to communicate through his painting his delight in the visual world.
I've been trying to be an artist for 85 years, and I've enjoyed every year of it.